The bulky ground type is probably the most consistently good archetype of Pokemon in competitive singles. Not only are bulky ground types prominent and viable in every single generation, but you'll also notice that most competitive teams, no matter the generation, will have some sort of bulky ground type on them. They are considered imperative to many teams and are like a glue that binds a team together. Why is this the case? Why are bulky ground types such a staple of competitive singles, no matter what format you're playing? The most obvious reason is just that the ground type is extremely strong. It's one of the best types in the whole game, and this has been true since the very first generation. Ground is super effective against 5 other types, so offensively it's amazing, and defensively it's great too. Ground types have a crucial immunity to electric, which is otherwise a strong type. And ground types are also resistant to rock, which is one of the most important types to resist. It makes them sturdy against the stealth rock, entry hazard, and of course rock type attacks. The ground type is weak to water, grass, and ice, and although these are not amazing types to be weak to, most attacking moves of these types tend to be special, making ground types excellent as physically defensive Pokemon, generally speaking. And these are also types that can be fairly easily covered by teammates. Ground typing on its own can work very well defensively. You can look at an example like the Hippo from Gen 4, who is one of the most solid physical walls in that tier. But ground typing also pairs very well with other types, generally speaking. And ground is usually an important ingredient to create really broken dual type combinations like water ground and ground flying. Some of the most elite type combos in the game include ground, because of the incredible offensive benefits of the typing and that crucial electric immunity. It is generally the case that a ground type can reliably check most physical threats while also dishing out respectable damage and offering your team crucial ground coverage, which hits so many different types. The forefather of all bulky ground types would certainly have to be Rhydon, from all the way back in Generation 1. In Gen 1 OU, this is the bulky ground type, and it laid the framework for what the Pokemon archetype would look like in the future. Rhydon's electric immunity makes it an extremely important line of defense against Zapdos, who might otherwise be kind of broken, but Rhydon completely stops it in its tracks with that crucial electric immunity. Rhydon is also quite good against the physical attackers of Gen 1 OU. This is partially due to its rock typing, which offers a normal resistance, but also due to its high HP and defense. And Rhydon's Stab Earthquake is incredibly hard hitting. Access to Earthquake is one of the chief reasons that ground type is so successful even today. Earthquake is just an extremely solid move with 100 power and 100 accuracy. Even a neutral Earthquake will frighten the majority of Pokemon in Generation 1 OU, and the super effective damage against many different things is appreciated as well. In Generation 2, Golem overtook Rhydon as the premier bulky ground type. Another great encapsulation of why this archetype is so powerful. Golem is a beautiful line of defense against the top dog of Gen 2 Snorlax, shrugging off its normal stab with its resistance and high defense. Electric immunity is still appreciated here, although Golem is notably under fire from hidden power now, from those electric types that previously couldn't threaten it at all. Even still though, Golem can act as a good deterrent, even if they have something up their sleeve to counteract Golem on occasion. Stab Earthquake is now even more relevant as the Steel type exists in Gen 2, and Ground is one of the few things super effective against Steel. Earthquake especially has a very high power and accuracy, making it one of the best options against Steel types. And Golem also has the crucial utility of Rapid Spin. Bulky ground types tend to be good at using utility moves like this due to their Swiss Army knife quality. Not only are they checking so many different things, outputting a bit of offense themselves, but these entry points that they can create and the threat that they represent allows them opportunities to click something like Rapid Spin in the heat of battle and get a bit of value for your team, a bit of support, a bit of a help. Quagsire was also added to the game in Gen 2, the first ever Pokemon to have the elite water-ground type combination. This is one of the strongest type combinations in the game, and a great example of why ground is such a beautiful ingredient in type combinations. Water and ground together only have a single weakness to grass. It's a ×4 weakness, but only having one weakness is incredible. And while Quagsire is not ranked OU in Generation 2, it is still sometimes seen, largely thanks to its typing, which I think says a lot, as when you look at its stats, they're nothing to write home about or anything. These stats are not outstanding. Sorry, Quagsire. But the typing is elite. Quagsire is actually one of the most reliable switch-ins to Zapdos and Raikou, especially because they tend not to carry Hidden Power Grass in this format. They're much more concerned with Rhydon, and they want neutral coverage for Nidoking as well, which HP Grass would not offer. So Hidden Power Water is preferred here. And what's awesome about Quagsire in Gen 2 is that it can run Belly Drum to be a late-game sweeper. In the early to mid-game, it does a good job walling and forcing out electric types and other things. Still dealing pretty good damage with a Stab Earthquake, even though it only has 85 attack, but if you can pull off a Belly Drum, Quagsire can actually sweep later on in the game. It outruns Snorlax very slightly by 5 points of speed, but that crucial 5 points of speed means that its Belly Drum boosted Earthquake is lethal. And with HP Rock for perfect coverage, this can actually be a decent win condition. I quite like Quagsire in Gen 2. Quagsire's role would completely shift to more of a stally direction in later games, due to it receiving the ability Unaware to ignore stat stage changes. But Quagsire is always a Pokemon that has punched above its weight and found viability in interesting places. And in the next generation, Gen 3, a Water Ground type Pokemon became the new premier bulky ground type of the format. Swampert in Gen 3 is my personal favorite bulky ground type ever, and I think it's a perfect encapsulation of the excellence of this archetype. Swampert is an absolute defensive pillar. It is able to answer many key offensive threats in the Gen 3 OU metagame, like Physical, Tyranitar and Salamence sets, Aerodactyl, and Metagross. And with Swampert's well-rounded defenses and offenses, the Pokemon is also not totally passive either. It has a respectable damage output with its stab moves like Hydro Pump, Surf, and Earthquake. What I like about Swampert is that it is pretty lacking in utility compared to other well-known bulky ground types in competitive singles. It doesn't have any entry hazards or rapid spin. It doesn't have explosion to trade with things. It doesn't have knockoff to remove items. What Swampert usually does is actually just switch in to defensively answer a thing and then click attacks. It has some utility like Roar to force an enemy to switch out. That can be good. It has Toxic as well to inflict poison, but these are, common options that a lot of different Pokemon get. They're not particularly special on Swampert or anything. Swampert is primarily used here for its strong combination of offense and defense. It can come in, take a hit, and then represent a threat with all of its powerful attacks on the following turn. This also leads to Swampert being quite versatile. You can lean completely into this offensive prowess with mixed attacking Swampert sets with options like Focus Punch to punish Blissey. There's Endeavor Swampert, which is completely offensive as well. And you can go completely defensive with something like Refresh Swampert to cure status, sit here and chip heal with Protect, and even inflict the enemy with poison. This is a very good set that can 1v1 a Blissey and just generally sit and not mind being in the face of Skarmory because of its ability to cure its own status and things like this. Swampert is a great example of not only why the ground type is so good, but why this archetype is so good. Especially because Swampert doesn't have reliable healing moves either. It doesn't have Recover, it doesn't have Regenerator as an ability or anything like that. That doesn't exist here. It's just a ground type existing, and yet its bulk is solid enough, and its damage output is solid enough, and its move pool is solid enough that it is incredibly good anyway. I believe Swampert is one of the few Pokemon in Gen 3 OU that literally fits on any sort of team, whether it's a hyper offense team or a full-on stall team or anything in between those two extremes. Swampert will fit on any archetype, no matter what you're doing. It's arguably the most reliable Pokemon in this format. And I consider it quite an honest Pokemon. It's not doing anything overpowered, it just has solid stats. It answers a bunch of useful things to answer, and it can clap back with its own offense. A perfect example of the excellence of the bulky ground archetype and the fundamental reasons why it is such a good archetype of Pokemon that is seen across the series. Gen 3 also introduced Flygon, who is the most popular alternative bulky ground type to Swampert. And Flygon is another interesting Pokemon. Flygon has the Dragon Ground type combination. Yet another amazing typing. Flygon is only weak to Ice type attacks, which are ×4 super effective. That's a real threat to its person. And then Dragon type attacks, which are not that common in Gen 3. The Fairy type would later threaten this type combination, but the Fairy type does not exist at this point. So the result is actually one of the strongest defensive type combos you can get. Very powerful. Flygon's ability is also to levitate, which sets it apart from Swampert. It is notably immune to being chipped by spikes, immune to Dugtrio's trapping effect, and also, of course, immune to the ground type, which is very powerful. Even though Flygon is not as central as Swampert is, it's still very commonly seen. It is a powerful alternative because everything's trying to hit Swampert with grass coverage, but Flygon sidesteps that, being neutral to grass. That's a very positive trait about Flygon. Also, Flygon can be quite passive. It tends to run this set most commonly, the defensive set with full HP, almost full defense investment, and a little bit of EVs elsewhere. But even with this set, which has no attack investment, a Stab Earthquake still goes pretty crazy. Even some of the more passive ground-type Pokemon that aren't trying to be aggressive can still dish out serious damage thanks to the inherent strength of Stab Earthquake. It is interesting that as the power level increases, the popular ground types shift to have more reliable type combinations with fewer weaknesses, and a Pokemon like Rhydon that was once the premier example of a bulky ground type is now falling off. Even though this is the founding father of the very archetype, and it operated similarly to something like a Swampert or a Flygon in the past 2 generations, Rhydon no longer actually feels bulky due to the rise of water-type attacks that are ×4 super effective and grass-type attacks that are ×4 super effective, more so than it had to worry about before. In addition, many of the powerful physical threats that Swampert and Flygon can handle still threaten Rhydon. Tyranitar carries a super effective Earthquake. Rhydon can take one, but it just doesn't help very much to be weak to ground as a bulky ground type. All of these physical threats are usually using ground coverage, and that leaves you wide open. They're also much faster than Snorlax was. When Snorlax was the top dog, you could get away with being weak to its Earthquake because you outrun it and threaten it better. Now this is not as much the case. Gen 4, I think, is where we started to see what would eventually become the modern incarnation of the bulky ground type. Gen 4 saw the introduction of the move Stealth Rock, which became, overnight, the most powerful move in competitive singles. It's an entry hazard that deals damage to the enemy based on their rock weakness. Everybody knows this move is insane in 6v6 singles. But what's noteworthy about this for the bulky ground type is that this move was very commonly distributed to ground types. Before this, ground types already had this fundamental important defensive and offensive place. But now it felt like they became even better because they had access to this now imperative utility option that is considered mandatory on competitive singles teams. The most noteworthy new bulky ground type in the Gen 4 OU metagame is the Hippo, of course. This is one of the most elite defensive Pokemon in the format, and one that I have had a bit of a feud with in the past. And I got a bit heated speaking about him and describing all of his different traits in the past, and I do apologize to him. I think it's about time, Hippo, that we put the past behind us and move forward to greener pastures. To the ocean or somewhere good like that, perhaps. Anyway, back on topic. The Hippo is a mono ground type, which is actually kind of rare in the world of bulky ground types. Usually ground pairs with some other type for some broken combination, but Hippo is a rare and humble mono ground type Pokemon that has seen competitive excellence. The Hippo is able to set sand on the field, meaning it's an alternative to Tyranitar for a sand setter, which is very good. The Hippo has the reliable healing of Slack Off, it has the ever valuable Stealth Rock, and of course Earthquake, as many ground types do, for that delightfully valuable stab damage. And Hippo's stats are also quite solid. It's got a fairly typical ground type stat line, leaning more towards attack and defense, but I think its stats feel quite well-rounded here. Hippo just does a lot in a single Pokemon slot. And I think it's worth noting that in Gen 4, the defensive identity of the ground type did change a little bit, because the physical special split occurred in Gen 4. Prior to Gen 4, all the types that ground was weak to, water, grass, and ice, could only be special. And this was key. This is what made ground types so good as physical defensive Pokemon, because they weren't weak to any physical attacking types at all. So they could just focus on being physical walls and do very well at that. Now, physical attacks actually can threaten ground types. So the Hippo is under fire from Gyarados, for example, a powerful physical water type attacker. The Hippo is also worried about Breloom with its super effective Seed Bomb. But despite these new holes in the defensive ground type's armor, it still functions very well in the physically defensive role. Most physical attackers are still struggling in the face of a simple ground type. Somebody like Tyranitar, even though Tyranitar can now carry Ice Punch for physical coverage, which threatens the Hippo. When Ice Punch is a low power move that's not stab boosted, the Hippo can stomach that well enough and 1v1 Tyranitar quite well. You're also still solid against physical Dragonite sets and many other physical attackers. The Hippo will do good work, wall things, threaten them with Earthquake and Ice Fang, set Stealth Rock, and heal repeatedly. This is a powerful bulky ground type. Gliscor was also notably added to the game in Gen 4, a significant addition for the future of the franchise. This was not the first ever Pokemon with a ground flying typing. There was Gligar before it, but Gligar was too small to be powerful. Gliscor is larger, which makes it better, and this is yet another really good type combo. With this typing, you're only weak to 2 types, times 4 weakness to ice, and a weakness to water, and that's it. Ground flying is particularly good because it is neutral to rock, meaning it doesn't take that much from stealth rock while also reaping the benefits that can be gleaned from flying typing, such as spike immunity and ground immunity. A typing with 2 immunities is always insane, and in Gen 4 OU this is a solid Pokemon. It's uncharacteristically fast for a bulky ground type, with 95 base speed, which is very good, generally well-rounded stats, particularly that excellent 125 base defense. It has Roost for reliable healing. It's pretty good at using Taunt thanks to its speed, can do a bit of stall breaking, denying healing and hazards from others. And this is also before it had the ability Poison Heal. It just has Hyper Cutter as its ability in Gen 4, and is being used purely on the merits of its typing and stats. But in Gen 5 they gave Gliscor Poison Heal, which was a huge buff to an already solid Pokemon. Gliscor receiving Poison Heal made it one of the best bulky ground types in history. Poison Heal is an ability that makes the poison status effect good for you instead of being bad. Instead of dealing damage to you, poison will heal you for 1/8 of your max HP every turn, which is more than Leftovers heals. If you have Poison Heal, you can inflict poison on yourself with the Toxic Orb item, and in doing so, not only do you activate an incredible amount of chip healing per turn, but also you are effectively immune to enemy status because you're already poisoned. A Pokemon can't have more than one status ailment at a time. Gliscor remains a top-tier bulky ground type even in Gen 9 OU. This was such a significant buff that Gliscor has maintained its competitive relevance since. In fact, it was for a time banned from Gen 9. Not for that long, but there was a brief period where Gliscor was banned. That goes to show its excellence. This is one of those competitive Pokemon that is near perfect. It has just about everything you could ever want. Completely immune to status, it has Stealth Rock, the powerful entry hazard, it has U-Turn, a way to pivot out and maintain momentum. It of course has Stab Earthquake, as many ground types do. It even has Knock Off for item removal. And in Gen 9, they gave it Spikes as well, a buff. Gen 9 also saw the loss of some of Gliscor's options like Defog and Roost, but these are small prices to pay. And Gliscor overall got better in Gen 9, not only thanks to its newfound access to spikes, but also because terastallization is so good on Gliscor. The ability to change your type to normal and do Stab Facade, boosted by your own self-inflicted poison, or just Terra Water for a good defensive typing to avoid incoming super effective hits. This is one of the most elite Pokemon ever made, truly. Speaking of the most elite Pokemon ever made, we now arrive at Gen 5, where the poster child of the bulky ground archetype was officially released. Landorus-Therian is one of the most iconic faces of competitive Pokemon in general, but especially competitive singles, where it is an absolute central pillar of every OU format that it's ever existed in. Landorus-Therian has the same typing that Gliscor has, ground flying. And it has similarly well-rounded stats, with a good mix of speed, relatively alright bulk, but most notably it has a massive attack stat of 145. A truly elite base attack stat right there. Landorus-Therian also has the ability Intimidate, which gives it an enhanced amount of effective bulk. Intimidate will, on switch in, lower the enemy's attack stat by 1 stage. By lowering their attack stat, you of course nerf them a little bit, often forcing them out, but also you shield yourself from incoming physical damage, which is beautiful. This Pokemon is an absolute king at switching in, tanking a hit, intimidating the enemy, and then probably forcing them out with big damage itself. Using these entry points to achieve momentum with U-turn, dish out a big hit with Earthquake, set Stealth Rock. In later gens it also has Defog to remove hazards for further utility. It has Knock Off for additional utility as well, and Dark coverage. And the Pokemon is also versatile, can be used with completely offensive sets, investing in attack and speed with options like Sword Dance and Rock Polish. Or it can be completely defensive, equipping a Rocky Helmet to get a bit of chip damage out of its defensive switches, or a Leftovers for added longevity, and utilizing options like Toxic and Defog, more defensively leaning choices. And what's so great about Landorus-Therian is even the fully defensive sets feel scary, because off the back of your base attack and stab Earthquake, you can still dish out serious damage. On the other side of the spectrum, the fully offensive sets still operate well defensively. The typing is so good, Intimidate is so excellent at just stopping the enemy in their tracks, and you will still physically answer a lot of things. Despite not investing fully into your defenses, you still operate well defensively anyway. And this, I think, is yet another perfect example of why this archetype props up in every format, is because the ground type tends to just be so tremendous in both roles, offense and defense. And even if you build the Pokemon passively, it's still threatening. If you build it offensively, it still walls a bunch of things with its naturally good defensive traits, without needing any investment into them. Gen 5 was also the first time Garchomp was legal to use in OU, and you may think of Garchomp as a primarily offensive Pokemon, but honestly the Pokemon is quite bulky. The typing is good with few weaknesses, and its defensive stats are nothing to sneeze at, especially its high 108 base HP. Honestly, its defenses are quite well rounded too, and it has that high attack and above average speed, just above the base 100 threshold, which is key. Garchomp, part of its excellence is not just its offensive power, but the fact that it's pretty bulky for such an offensively threatening Pokemon too. Once again, leaning into the strengths of the ground type. That said, Garchomp is a far more aggressive Pokemon than Landorus-Therian comparatively. Part of the appeal of it is its offensive firepower, especially in Gen 5 OU. Even though it actually has a lower attack stat, its access to Dragon Stab is key and very powerful here. Outrage, especially being a significant wall-breaking option. It also has access to Fire Blast for mixed coverage to threaten Ferrothorn. Aqua Tail, which can be boosted by Rain in Gen 5 and threaten things like enemy Landorus-Therian, enemy Gliscor. And of course Garchomp still has the ever-valuable utility of Stealth Rock. Garchomp was one of the most popular Stealth Rock setters, not only in Gen 5, but in many different OU formats, due to all of these amazing traits combined. Recently in Gen 9, Garchomp has even leaned more into a defensive role, taking full advantage of its ability Rough Skin, which is like a built-in Rocky Helmet, punishing enemies for making contact. Sure, it might not seem right, but I would put Garchomp in the bulky ground-type category. Certainly a very aggressive Pokemon, but part of the reason it can get so much out of its aggressive tools is because it can safely switch in on things, actually take a hit. And Gen 5 also added Excadrill. Excadrill is an interesting case for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that Excadrill was not always allowed in OU, it was banned for a long time, but in more recent years they instead banned Sandrush, the ability, rather than Excadrill, the whole Pokemon. So Excadrill returned back to the format and was legal again. Another thing that's interesting about Excadrill is that it often is used primarily for a offensive role, and it actually can be quite frail when it is leaning into that. Excadrill may have a high HP stat of 110, which is very good, but its actual defensive stats are very low. Only 60 base defense and 65 special defense. When you're running an offensive Excadrill, it does feel pretty weak. It commonly falls to super effective hits. But Excadrill does have the excellent Ground Steel type combo, and this is an amazing type combo. When you throw two of the best types in the game together, it's obviously going to be amazing. Steel offers so many more resistances, as well as a complete immunity to being poisoned, which is enormous. And Excadrill can also be run in a bulky role. When you invest EVs into its defenses and HP, it actually does result in a very bulky Pokemon. Excadrill can chip heal in the sand with Protect and Leftovers, for some form of healing at least. And Excadrill also has the utility of Rapid Spin, which is key. This is one of its best options, and part of the reason it's so nice to run it as a bulkier Pokemon, because Rapid Spin to remove those hazards on your side of the field is just incredibly important. Bulky Excadrill is sort of a precursor to what we now have in Gen 9 with Great Tusk and Iron Treads, I would say. The bulky ground type with Rapid Spin. And to be honest, from Gen 5 onwards, the bulky ground type role started to become a bit homogenous. These guys that they introduced in Gen 5, or that they buffed in Gen 5, were so good that for multiple generations they were the go-tos. Landorus-Therian, Garchomp, Excadrill, and Gliscor. These four remained meta for generations in a row. And still are now. Garchomp may have fallen off and Excadrill may have declined with more competition, but Landorus-Therian is still excellent in Gen 9 despite even being nerfed, losing the options of defog and knockoff. And Gliscor is better than ever. Gliscor remains excellent, as I mentioned earlier. You did sometimes see occasional other bulky ground types. Gastrodon was one that you might see. Another example of a water ground type Pokemon that was useful for its ability Storm Drain, which offers water immunity. And that was very good as a form of counterplay against rain teams or other water type threats. I mean, a water ground type with water immunity is just one of the most defensively powerful things ever. Even though Gastrodon's stats are not the best, those defensive qualities still have their place and are very good. But then Gen 9 came around to absolutely decimate the ground type order of the past, as Gen 9 added multiple insane new bulky ground types that have all been incredibly impactful on the competitive singles metagame. The most noteworthy of all is of course Great Tusk, who is sort of the face of Gen 9 competitive, and it feels like it has replaced Landorus-Therian as the new big dog of this ever-present, eternal archetype of the bulky ground type. Great Tusk operates in much the same way as many of these examples. It's a ground fighting type, which is a new and unique type combination, which actually ends up being pretty damn good defensively. It's interesting because even though Fairy weakness sucks to have, and so does Flying weakness, bulky ground types tend not to be good against those Pokemon anyway. They usually have low special defense and would take a lot from a Moonblast or something. So you're often covering other defensive answers for those types anyway. But the key important factor about Great Tusk's typing is the fact that it now has Dark resistance. And this is big, as Dark has over the years become a very prominent offensive type. The Dark resistance is what really makes Great Tusk stand out in the defense department. And of course the offensive benefit of fighting typing is clear. With a stab close combat, you have another extremely high powerful offensive type to take advantage of. Great Tusk has amazing stats. Its only bad stat really is special defense. Everything else is tremendous. Even its speed is not bad for such a bulky and threatening Pokemon, with base 87. And Great Tusk's move pool is what really makes it outstanding. The key option Great Tusk has access to is Rapid Spin. This is the big one. With Landorus-Therian no longer having defog, hazard removal is scarce in Gen 9. It is very important to have some form of hazard removal, and the options have been limited. A lot of things lost defog, so Great Tusk being a Landorus-Therian adjacent Pokemon that does have hazard removal is one of the main reasons that you just slap this onto most teams because it checks a bunch of different things. It's a good offensive threat itself, and it has the key utility of Rapid Spin. This is the big selling point of the Pokemon. It is also crucially a Rapid Spinner that can threaten the common Rapid Spin blocker Goldengo. Goldengo is able to block not only Rapid Spin but Defog, but you, of course, outrun and threaten Goldengo with Headlong Rush for lethal force, making you particularly excellent at actually clicking Rapid Spin without being destroyed by Goldengo. You threaten Goldengo's life. Great Tusk also has the coverage of Ice Spinner, which has been a pretty crucial option. Ground and Ice are a very complementary coverage combination. Ice Spinner hits a lot of enemy ground types like Gliscor, and grass types that resist ice as well. Other bulky ground types similar to Great Tusk do not actually have a solid ice coverage option like this with 80 power. I think some of them have Ice Fang, but that's not a great move. This is a pretty significant option. And of course Great Tusk has the common tool of Stealth Rock, which many of them have, and Knock Off. Another outstanding tool. Dark coverage, item removal. It's able to pop the balloon on Goldengo if they're carrying a balloon. Always good to have, always amazing. Great Tusk also takes advantage of the inherent versatility that a ground typing offers. Great Tusk can be fully defensive, fully offensive. It can run Bulk Up as a sweeper. It can run miscellaneous utility coverage, stab, whatever. Arguably the most central Pokemon in Gen 9 OU. But Great Tusk has a counterpart and an alternative that is also extremely good, and that is Iron Treads, who is the future form of Donphan, where Great Tusk is the past form. Iron Treads is not as popular as Great Tusk. Great Tusk tends to be better and more reliable, but on some teams Iron Treads can be preferred. They are extremely similar Pokemon, with similar stat spreads and tools. Iron Treads is notably much faster than Great Tusk, with 106 base speed, which is quite excellent for a bulky ground type. This might be the fastest one, in fact. And Iron Treads has the ground steel typing that was previously shared by Excadrill. Iron Treads is kind of just a power-crept version of Excadrill, to be honest. It is pretty much better in every way. It's faster, bulkier. It has the same option of Rapid Spin, but also Knockoff, and some other things like Volt Switch, which is cool. A form of pivoting on a Pokemon like this is nice. The only thing Excadrill has over Iron Treads is Sand Rush, but then if it's running Sand Rush, it's not really a bulky ground type, is it? Iron Treads is superior to Excadrill in the other departments that Excadrill used to be okay at. Perhaps the bulkiest of all bulky ground types was also introduced in Gen 9. Ting-Lu, who was part of the legendary quartet, the Treasures of Ruin. Ting-Lu has a dark ground typing, which is quite novel for a primarily defensive Pokemon, and Ting-Lu's stats are ludicrously good. 155 base HP is through the roof, 125 defense as well, and 80 special defense is not that amazing, but when you factor in Vessel of Ruin, which lowers the enemy's special attack when you're on the field, you have an effectively higher special defense. So Ting-Lu can take hits from anything, almost. Ting-Lu is a little bit of a one-dimensional Pokemon. It has the important entry hazards of Stealth Rock and Spikes. It has Stab Earthquake. But that's about it. It's sort of a hazard setting machine that can click Stab Earthquake, which does hit pretty hard off the back of 110 base attack, of course. But it does not have the versatility or key options of something like a Great Tusk or an Iron Treads or even a Gliscor. So Ting-Lu is slightly less popular than they are and also less offensively potent than they are, but still a prominent Pokemon in OU, one of the strongest, and definitely the guy that you run if you want an even more solid defensive switch in, if you want the sheer bulk of it. Ting-Lu can deal with boost sweepers quite well thanks to its access to Whirlwind, and Ruination is another option it commonly uses just to deal half of an enemy's current HP. Not the most amazing option in the world, it's similar to something like Super Fang, but when you lack any other good way to just apply pressure to things, it can be solid on a Pokemon like Ting-Lu. And Gen 9 also added Clodsire, a very defensively leaning bulky ground type. Clodsire has the ground poison type combo, which is quite good. It can erase toxic spikes from the field, it can't be poisoned, and it has key resistances to types like fighting and fairy, where other ground types don't. Clodsire has the ability Unaware, which is the main reason to use it. It completely ignores the enemy's stat stage changes. With Unaware, Clodsire fits well on hard stall teams, as attempts to boost up and power through your defensive core will be completely thwarted by Clodsire. Clodsire has the reliable healing of recovery, of course Stab Earthquake. It also has Spikes, which is always amazing. It can be similar to Ting-Lu in being a bulky ground type that primarily just sets hazards, but also the fact that it has Unaware is great and makes it uniquely equipped for stall teams who can struggle against boost sweepers. It also has Toxic, which is more scarce in Gen 9. That's actually quite noteworthy that it has Toxic. Clodsire is not presently ranked in OU, but it was in the past, and it's still a very respectable member of the format. It's probably not high in usage right now due to the fact that it's a bit passive and it fits more on defensive teams, which are not really the best right now. And there are many alternatives to Clodsire that are more proactive, like Great Tusk, Iron Tread, Gliscor, etc. But still, Clodsire is one of the bulkiest ground types ever made. Undoubtedly. And a new bulky ground type that can crucially fit on stall. Overall, the bulky ground type is an archetype of Pokemon that I think will be ever present in 6v6 singles. No matter what generation we're in, no matter what format we're playing, there will be bulky ground types and they'll probably be some of the most important Pokemon to throw onto your teams. Ground typing offers that key electric immunity, which is a great line of defense against Volt Switch, Spam, and the powerful electric type special attackers that are quite common throughout the generations too. Ground has that beautiful Stealth Rock resistance, which makes it more consistent. Ground types tend to have access to some of the strongest utility in the game. Stab Earthquake is always a good offensive option, even if you're not that offensively leaning of a Pokemon. Stab Earthquake will always be good. It seems to just be a universal truth that ground types rise to the top. They have this unbeatable combination of defense, offense, and utility, meaning they can reliably fit on most teams, and most teams need them. They are the pillars that hold competitive singles together, I would argue. Thank you for watching to the end of the video. As a result of watching to the end, you are once again visited by the mysterious penguin, and he is pleased with the following individuals who correctly guessed his riddle. These individuals have been granted the secret penguin coin, which they can exchange for a favor at any time. I hope they use this wisely. Thank you.